Right, hello there everybody. Yes, it's another additional episode, another notification where you just suddenly go, what on earth is going on? Why is he doing more shows outside of his Sundays? But yes, I am, because we've got ourselves a very special guest on the way. David Pepose is going to talk to us about his Kickstarter campaign. Before we kind of do that, I'm going to bring this up and just sort of show this to you, because we have got ourselves some great episodes coming up. So please join me tomorrow, 10 a.m. These are all 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. GMT. It was only the Derek Robertson that was a little bit late. So tomorrow we're going to be talking to Jeff Trexler from the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. That's going to be an interesting conversation. I think it's a strong and important one. We've also got ourselves James Tiernan IV, who's going to be talking to us on Sunday. So if you are a fan of his work, and heaven knows you should be, because there's some amazing books he's coming out with. That's going to be this week. Sunday after, we've got Cullen Bunn. Sunday the 13th, we've got ourselves Julie Tate, who is the director of Lakes Festival. We're going to be talking to her about the challenges of bringing a virtual festival to the fore, considering it's a slightly different thing to doing a Comic-Con, because when you've got multiple rooms and multiple disciplines which a festival takes in, that's what it really kind of covers. So how that you do that on a virtual scale, that's what they're going to do. And then on Sunday 20th of September, That Texas Blood is a book that's being published by Image Comics. I'm going to talk to Chris Condon and Jacob Phillips. Really looking forward to talking to those two, the creative team behind that. As always, we want to say thank you to our amazing Kickstarter, amazing Patreon supporters, of course, scrolling there on screen. I think this where I don't know if the countdown will actually go behind it, but at least we'll get we'll bring that up in a second. Aaron Neighbours is saying, hola from San Diego. Good to see you, Aaron. I know that you've spoken to David already, but I've deliberately not watched your interview, so we're going to keep it nice and separate. And we're not going to repeat questions because I haven't seen it. But there we go. But once again, thanks to our amazing Patreon supporters. Do join us at patreon.com/EnglishmanSDCC. It brings us, try and bring you some exclusive content on that page. And any way that we can kind of showcase what we do that on that page. Also, the full episode of the Sunday shows goes up on the Patreon. You'll be able to also see the full Derek Robertson episode. That goes up on the YouTube as of midday GMT tomorrow. So if you didn't see the full episode because you're not a Patreon supporter, you'll be able to see the full thing tomorrow. It's a great episode, actually. I hope you'll enjoy it. Right, top of the hour. Let's do this. Right then, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching in the world. Welcome along to Talking Con, a cup of tea with an Englishman in San Diego. It's one of our incidental episodes, and it's a pleasure to have you joining us today. We've got ourselves somebody who's joining us who we haven't seen for a while. We spoke to him about a year and a half ago, but it's now good to have him back. No, it might even be longer. So it'd be good to actually catch up and see what he's getting up to. But that's where I think you should take a look at this.
right.
How metal does that look? That looks cool. It is a Kickstarter, which I'll stick the address down at the bottom because I really want you to go and check this out because the second I saw this roll round on my social media, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, you're seeing something pretty damn special. But we are joined by David Pepose. Hello there, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Well, listen, it's a pleasure to have you because, like I say, it's been a while. I mean, I think you were one of the first kind of major comics creatives to come and join me and sort of like say hi and drop
that's a
by.
huge compliment. I certainly don't consider myself a major anything except maybe a major pain in the ass. But yeah, no, I'm so glad to be back. I'm so glad to catch up. Yeah, it's been a minute. I think probably the last time we talked was Spencer and Locke Volume 2.
Yeah, that would be it. That's what I was thinking because I think first things first. If anybody doesn't know who you are, if you're watching, by the way, if you're watching on any of the platforms, they're all public, so you can get your comments in and any questions. YouTube's probably the best because there's less of a delay. But if you do have any questions for David, do let us know. But if there's somebody perhaps who is watching this and doesn't know who you are, David, introduce yourself, sir.
Yeah, I'm David Pepose. I'm the writer of Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel over at Action Lab. And I just launched a Kickstarter this week for a book called The OZ. So, yeah, I'm really excited to chat about it. This book has been in the works for a very long time, since the first volume of Spencer and Locke came out, actually. So it's a real relief and a real weight off my shoulders to finally get to share this book with the world.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a year to release a Kickstarter, this is a weird one to do it in, considering that I think it's safe to say a lot of people are trying to find new or alternative ways. I mean, Kickstarter's obviously been going for a while. It's an established way of getting the word out there, but a lot of creators are trying to find that way of connecting with an audience, considering that people are starved for content. They want good stories, and this is a way to get stories out there. So, I mean, if you could talk about the kind of like the history of this particular project, how long has it been percolating in the back of your brain?
Sure. I've been working on this. For those who haven't read my first book, Spencer and Locke, the high concept was, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? And, that's not a book I did lightly. That's a book you either succeed or you fail, but you do it loudly. So I had no idea if I was going to get to do another comic. Thankfully, people really responded to that book. And so when I kind of popped my head up after the dust settled and realized it was safe, I came up with a few more ideas. I came up with Spencer and Locke Volume 2. That was in my back pocket. Going to the Chapel, my most recent work. Die Hard beats Wedding Crashers, because I was the world's worst best man at a wedding. And then the OZ. And so I kind of stumbled upon it. I wanted to do something in the fantasy realm, something that sort of has a bigger sense of scope and scale than street level crime. And when I wrote down a bunch of my inspirations, the Wizard of Oz popped out at me as sort of an acronym, the occupied zone. And then I realized, this story of Mad Max meets the Hurt Locker meets the Wizard of Oz really kind of just struck me like a bolt of lightning. So, and like a bolt of lightning, this did not have a straightforward path. It's very much a zigzag. I remember I had developed the storyline for a publisher before we had artist Ruben Rojas and colorist Whitney Kogar and letterer T.C. Hopkins on board. And we made it to about the 1 yard line. It was one of those things that we came up against a dark fantasy story by a much bigger name creator that had been pitched around the same time. So I don't begrudge anybody for picking that book. But the editor that I had worked with had said, I want you to know this wasn't a referendum on you or the quality of your work. That's not, couldn't be further from the truth. This was just the chips didn't fall your way. So he recommended that I pursue this book further. And that little bit of kindness was all it took. I found artist Ruben Rojas, and we started work on the book. So
if you could quickly go back to that and explain. I think when it comes to comics, I think very few people really understand and recognize the collaborative nature of putting a book together, especially if it's creator owned. I think to find someone that is syncopatio with your idea and your ideas. Where did you find him?
So this is kind of a 1 in a million shot, but the 1 in a million shots happen every day. It's I found Ruben on Twitter. He had been answering a call for artists that somebody else had posted, and I saw Ruben's work, and I was stunned. Not only that he hadn't been picked up, but that he wasn't a superstar already. He has this style that's kind of Dan Mora by way of Sean Murphy. And he's such a gifted, not just composer with his panels, but a designer as well. I mean, you can see just in that page that you have on the screen, he lends so much detail and breathes so much life into our war-torn land of Oz. So yeah, I approached him, and I pitched Ruben 3 different stories. One of them being the then unacquired Grand Theft Astro, the second being the OZ, and the third being a project that I'm kind of retooling for redevelopment. And Ruben, he's a huge fan of fantasy. He's a huge fan of post-apocalyptic artwork. And so this really kind of hit his sweet spot. And I've never worked with anybody like Ruben before. He really is the full package. He doesn't really require much in the way of hand-holding from me. We talk pretty extensively sort of in the layout and thumbnail sections of it all. And in the character designs, of course, I usually tend to write like kind of a full paragraph or a full page sometimes, just talking about different references and their own backstory. But Ruben really, he takes the ball and runs with it. And it's very rare that I sort of have anything other than great job to say. And, the handful of times that I'm like, oh, hey, could we add the tin soldier in the background of a page, for example? He couldn't be more gracious. He's such a joy to work with. And yeah, I mean, I think, the way that he collaborates with Whitney Kogar, our colorist, who you might know her from Giant Days, they really just egg each other on, and they really kind of inspire each other to bring their all-time best work.
I mean, what was the kind of time frame for them to come on board the project? Because I mean, obviously this year has been. This is a year that we're going to talk about for a while.
It's been crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's been the kind of like timeline for putting this book together?
It's been. Well, the thing is that we're surprisingly far ahead with everything. So like I said, I've been working on this book for about 3 years, and Ruben joined us. I want to say it was sometime in 2018. It might have been late 2018, I think. And Whitney and DC Hopkins joined us last year. So that was part of the reason why we put out the Kickstarter the way we are with a 44-page first issue, is because I had already written all 6 standard-sized issues, and Ruben had already drawn 2 of them. Wow. And so the thinking was, why wait for permission anymore? Especially because I had been looking to do Kickstarter for the better part of a year anyway, for exactly the reasons you were talking about, which is, there's a whole audience of readers that I realized I was doing zero outreach to. People who might not buy a book at their comic shop or Amazon or at a comics convention. And so COVID was kind of the thing that made me realize we could solve one problem with another, where we could give the OZ a loving home and put it out on our timetable and introduce ourselves to the Kickstarter community with our A game.
I mean, I think the thing that we've been finding with people that have been putting Kickstarter together is because at the end of the day, they're struggling to find a way to deal and work with getting books out to an audience when an industry has effectively just kind of come to a bit of a crashing halt.
Sure.
I mean, thankfully, we're starting to get back up to something resembling full speed again. But for that short period of time, everything did just stop on a dime. I mean, what was your thoughts about the timing of putting that Kickstarter out?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head. I think COVID really was a big disruption moment for our industry. And I can't, if there's a creator who hasn't rethought how they're going to do business in the wake of that, they're deluding themselves. For me, I was a big con warrior. I had 16 conventions scheduled this year. I only made 2 of them.
What was your last convention?
C2E2 in Chicago. And that was about 2 weeks before everything shut down. Here in LA, at least. And, so I had been thinking, I want to start pivoting towards digital. I want to start fleshing out my newsletter and my social media and doing, pivoting to online sales and online platforms. And yeah, I think ultimately, it's hard to future-proof yourself as a creator, especially in this business. It's very turbulent. But I think people are starting to realize that the direct market isn't the monolithic entity that it was 6 months ago. It's not to say that I'm not going to work with traditional publishers. I love working with traditional publishers. I have books in the works with traditional publishers. But I think, sort of the way that I see the best way of future-proofing myself is to work with the direct market, to work with platforms like Kickstarter, to work with online things like Webtoons or Comixology or even Gumroad, and also to be looking for work outside of the direct market. I mean, the traditional publishers like Scholastic or Random House, they have numbers that dwarf Batman and Superman and Spider-Man. So I think, any creator who wants to go the distance, and I've always said I want to be a 30-year man, they're going to have to kind of weave between those four markets, as well as, hitting conventions once conventions reopen, as well as sort of being savvy as far as their multimedia opportunities are concerned. I think a smart creator is not going to put all their eggs in one basket anymore, because as we've seen, all it takes is kind of one meteor and suddenly, the whole industry has turned into dinosaurs. So it's I consider myself really fortunate that we've launched when we've launched. I feel like, we launched our Kickstarter the same day as Scott Snyder launched his Kickstarter for Nocturnal. And I think it just goes to show that Kickstarter is its own planet with its own laws of physics, very different than the direct market. If Scott decided to pull a Beyonce in the direct market and drop a new image book the day of my release, it would be a kill shot. Their shops only have a limited amount of space and shelf space. It's also every shop, when they order a book, it's a risk. Not everything's returnable. Not every customer picks up their orders. So if a shop has to choose between the writer of Batman and the writer of Spencer and Locke, they're going to pick the writer of Batman, and I don't blame them. They've got bills to pay. Kickstarter, on the other hand, it was just a huge wind at our backs. So many people joined the platform that day who had never done a Kickstarter before. And the way the Kickstarter works, it's their business model. They want to keep you in the Kickstarter ecosystem. So, when Scott Snyder makes a sale, they have advertisements for other comics, including ours. So Scott is, I think, approaching $150,000 at this point, if he hasn't cracked it already.
I haven't checked lately, but yeah,
he was close. If he's not there already, I consider that a $150,000 commercial for us. You can't buy that kind of publicity, or at least I can't afford it. And that's the thing about Kickstarters. It's sort of because they want to keep you in the ecosystem. Kickstarter does a really effective job at marketing your work as well as other people's work. They encourage creators to promote each other, because a rising tide floats all boats.
Sure.
And unlike the direct market, where I see weaknesses of people might not know what a comic shop is or know where their local comic shop is. They might not feel comfortable in their local comic shop if they have gone in there. And that's on top of having series that have hundreds of issues that you have to keep up with. Kickstarter, you look at sort of one of their longest running titles, Skies of Fire, they're at issue 7. And so I think having that marketplace be just open to everybody, all you need is a web browser. Most people have heard of Kickstarter, and the ones who haven't are starting to learn about it. I think it's a really empowering tool for creators. And even the things I've had to learn over this Kickstarter are things I'm going to bring with me for the rest of my career. I thought I knew how to write a comic. I tend to practice. I knew the project management side, because as an indie, you're usually your own editor. I know how to do publicity just from my work at Newsarama and my work at CBS and my work as a newspaper reporter, and having put out 3 books already. But I didn't know how to print a book. I didn't know anything about shipping or production work. Now I do. And that's kind of
I was going to ask what has been the biggest learning curve from doing this.
Well, the biggest learning curve has been just kind of learning the rules of Kickstarter as I go along. The thing is you make backup plans and then backup plans. But you always, it's because you're expecting the worst. And nobody tells you what happens when you fund in 2 hours. And so suddenly it's like going out for a sandwich and winding up on the moon. Like there's no preparing for that. We're I think at like almost 480% funded, something like that.
This
like,
is where it gets really awkward because I'm here in the UK.
Yeah.
I show UK prices, at which point all the Americans just go, I don't know what those numbers mean. So it makes a little no sense, but I mean you certainly get the sense, because it's I mean, here in the UK it's just over £4,500. I think it's what was the goal?
Our goal in US was $6,000.
6,000, and it's just over £22,369. So yeah, you broke it.
we're gonna crack $30,000 probably by tomorrow, which is just an insane thing to say out loud and think. Yeah. And 8 days ago, I was stressing myself out into a panic attack, thinking, oh man, Kickstarter's gonna I'm going to click the prepare to launch button. It's going to tell me I need another round of approvals, and I won't be able to launch when I need to launch. My very patient girlfriend then had to go on her phone and looked up. She's like, no, all they're doing is you click prepare to launch. It just gives you a check mark to say, are you sure you're cool with this? And then you can launch. But yeah, it's, nobody prepares you for that. And so the real learning curve for me has been figuring out, I want to keep building our readership. But I don't ever want this to be the appearance of a cash grab. That couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, all the money we're getting is just going towards the next issues. And so for me, it's been, how do we add value to the book? And how do we give our readers more rewards to sort of give them incentive to keep telling their friends, to keep signing up? Because ultimately, like I said, I don't do Kickstarter for the money. I do it for the readership. It's because...
Well, I mean, that was going to be a question I was going to ask, because I mean, when I've spoken to people about Kickstarters and the reason why they've gone to them, they've taken different routes. And I mean, I've had Scott come on and he talked about the book. And he was saying that the money that he was raising was for the production of the book, because he wanted to make sure that book was secure.
Yeah.
And he wanted also to make sure that his artists were paid up front. I mean, there was another one from over the weekend. They wanted to make sure that their artists were paid up front. They wanted to make sure that they didn't have to wait. I mean, certainly for both Scott and also for the other projects that we've showcased.
Sure.
Because we're looking at 2021 when Scott's book comes out. He didn't want to have artists and letterers and editors who, at this point, are looking at the industry and going, where's the next payday coming from? And then this way it was allowed him to secure, they got what they were due, and then the book came out. I thought that was, and I'm guessing that's very similar aspect to what you're doing.
Exactly. I mean, like now I'm able to pay Ruben and Whitney in DC for the rest of the series. Which is great. It's a
nice little Christmas bonus, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's nice to be able to make a comic that you're not in the red for a long time on. All the books I've done previously, I've paid for out of pocket, and I have eventually recouped the production costs, but it takes a while. It's taken some very aggressive selling at conventions to do so, over the years, and so it's definitely freeing. It's definitely a very different ball game. To now be like, oh, okay, we're in the black for this series. But thinking about you want to figure out ways to reward your readers that doesn't delay the book and doesn't blow up your entire shipping budget. Because I've seen Kickstarters who they kind of flew too close to the sun, and suddenly their book is super delayed, or suddenly they've spent all the money on merch and shipping, and then they're going into debt over this, and that's not something we wanted to do. So, we've been trying to figure out, how can we enhance the book itself without delaying it? How can we include things that fit in our existing shipping mechanisms? Gemini mailers and priority envelopes and priority boxes at certain levels. And then what can we distribute digitally? And sort of figuring that calculus out. It's not unlike writing for comics, to be honest. The thing I like about comics is the constraints really inform the medium. You're
solving problems
exactly
right there on the page.
Exactly. You have a certain number of pages, a certain number of panels to each page, a certain number of word balloons per panel, a certain number of words per balloon. And that's the same way with Kickstarter. And so it's been a fun, if a little bit stressful, challenge, figuring out, for example, we want to add pinups to the book. Okay, who are we going to reach out to? I had a few pinups in the back pocket just for future issues, and very quickly, within about 24 hours, was like, oh, that plan just got exploded. We've got people like Joe Mulvey, for example, who did variant covers for me for Spencer and Locke. He's working on a pinup right now. We've got a really cool one from Alex Cipriano that we've had kind of nice. In the chamber for a while. It's sort of like if Jeff Darrow did his take on the Tin Man. Super cool looking. Kira Okamoto, they have a really cool print that we are this close to hitting for our stretch goal. We'll probably hit that tomorrow. But we're also doing all sorts of things. Our digital comics extravaganza, for example, we've got a dozen red hot indie creators who have all said that they will throw in books. So we've got people like Justin Jordan, Frank Gogol, Kevin Eastman, the co-creator of the Ninja Turtles.
I'm aware of his work. Yeah.
We're just, trying to find new ways to kind of, keep readers invested. But at the same time, the thing that I have to remind myself, and Charlie Stickney, who did White Ash on Kickstarter and now has taken it to Scout and is now their co-publisher. He was like, just remember you've won. Don't stress yourself out. Like you've already done so far above what anybody could have expected of you. That said, I'm like any other young Jewish boy. I grew up with a certain amount of guilt, and so
I was about to say, I was wondering if there was going to be that sort of imposter syndrome of we've reached our goal, and then it just keeps going. You go, right, and then it becomes a whole other pressure.
Yes, it really is. I mean, now it's sort of like, how do we build the widest possible readership? Because that's ultimately the real goal here is, and thankfully that's why we've got 2 more issues that we're going to be doing campaigns for next year, is that we'll be able to build on that platform and we'll be able to reintroduce people to this story. And then hopefully, if they like what they've read, they'll follow me for more books. They'll follow Ruben for more books. Hopefully they'll follow the 2 of us together, because Ruben and I are already talking about what we want to work on next together, because he's just been such a dream collaborator that, he's somebody like Jorge Santiago Jr., my Spencer and Locke brother in arms, where I'm like, this is a lifelong partnership. Like, I'm going to work with you until the wheels come off, because, when you find somebody who is just that talented, why would you want to let them go? And so, I'm very excited. I see this as the first of many projects that Ruben and I are going to collaborate on together, because he's the real deal, and I'm excited to ride his coattails for as long as he'll let me.
Well, I mean, I think the one thing that I've kind of let myself and the creators down when I've been talking to people about Kickstarters over the last couple of weeks is the fact that I've kind of focused on the Kickstarter and the actual methodology of getting the books out there. But let's actually talk about the story, because let's actually focus on that. Because you started with that the elevator pitch, the one sentence phrase, and the way that I've been pitching it to people is Wizard of Oz meets Metal Gear Solid is the way I've been doing it.
That's a great way to look at it as well.
Yeah. But how did it evolve? I mean, like you say, you've got your 6 issues in, you've got the basic framework down of that initial arc. How has the story evolved from that rather simple process of the Wizard of Oz meets ... How's it evolved into what it is now? Yeah,
I mean, the thing is similar to Spencer and Locke. I never want to write these stories for shock value's sake. That's like the laziest way of writing. There's no audience investment there's no emotional engagement. Everybody will look at a car crash once. They're not going back for seconds. So it's one of those things that I not all of my books are going to be looks at these dark riffs and childhood properties. That's not who I am. That's not how I want to roll. And the ones that I do, and I think right now, never say never, but I think 3 is kind of my limit for now. So I'm at 2 of 3. I want to make sure it's justified narratively, preferably by the source material. Spencer and Locke, which is what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City, that's supported by the source material. You know, Calvin had this vivid imagination, and he sort of manifested that in his best friend Hobbes. But what if that was a symptom of a darker pathology, of sort of a more twisted upbringing? For the OZ, which I've described as, what if Mad Max and the Hurt Locker took place in the Wizard of Oz? We've recast Dorothy Gale killing the Wicked Witch of the West as something like a botched regime change. So when she clicked her heels together 3 times and went back to Kansas, Dorothy unwittingly left Oz with this horrific power vacuum that plunged the whole country into years of civil war. So our story picks up a generation later with Dorothy's granddaughter and namesake, who happens to be a disillusioned Iraq war veteran. She's come back home to Kansas with some real trauma, some real guilt, and some real scars. And she's just been trying to put the pieces of her life back together while she cares for her ailing grandmother. Unfortunately, our tornado strikes in Kansas, and our new Dorothy finds herself dropped into the war-torn land of Oz. So she's going to have to navigate her past and her grandmother's legacy, not to mention navigating her grandmother's former friends, if she hopes to survive the occupied zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing as well, which really appeals from the story and the pages that I've seen so far, is because the landscape of Oz has evolved, and I mean, we've got if I can find the page, where is it? There we go. I mean, that's a different flying monkey than I think anyone has ever possibly imagined. But it's if you had Dorothy return to Oz a generation later, then it's you're still dealing with the little girl from Kansas. What you've got in your lead character is someone who is not only traumatized, but also bloody well trained, and can go into this landscape and has the tools to handle herself.
Absolutely.
So there's a little bit more of a power balance there. Whereas with the original Wizard of Oz, and it is something that always did kind of rankle with me, is that you have this... Dorothy's almost like this floating flotsam that just kind of like just floats. She doesn't walk down the Yellow Brick Road. She just almost gets carried along on the tide. This is someone who can...
take care of herself.
Take care of herself.
You absolutely hit it right on the head. That is absolutely what we were shooting for with this book, because and people compare, say, Dorothy with Detective Locke from Spencer and Locke, and I say they are cut from the same cloth, but like you said, Dorothy's a much more take charge figure. She doesn't have that luxury of sort of just sitting there and kind of and navel gazing and sort of re-examining that past, because she gets kind of dropped into the thick of it and she has to make a do or die decision. And so, the land of Oz has teeth now, but Dorothy, because of her training, she's able to see kind of that wild, broken magic, and she sees it as a weapon to defend herself and those around her. And so that's been sort of the really cool moments of the OZ for me. Because, for example, you look at the Wizard of Oz's balloon, and you might not see that as a platform for a Halo drop, but Dorothy would. and so so that's sort of that collision of fantasy and war. Seeing how the sparks fly is really interesting to me. But at the same time, I think we're able to, like I said, it's all about how do we justify it narratively. And I feel like Dorothy lets me build on themes that I've already explored with Spencer and Locke, and even go into the chapel to some extent, about trauma. And not only does trauma shape us, which is kind of how what I initially thought with the original Spencer and Locke, but I think it's also our traumas become sort of the themes for our lives. We wind up always circling back to them. And sometimes we confront them. Sometimes we try to run from them. Sometimes we try to bury them. But sort of how we face them kind of sets the tenor of our lives. Dorothy, being dropped into the OZ, she sees a place that in certain ways she's never left. This dredges up some of the worst memories of her life in Iraq and Afghanistan, which we'll explore as the series continues. But at the same time, deep down, I think she sees it as a second chance to get things right. She'll be thinking a lot about sort of what's the morality of war here, especially as she's kind of thrust into this uncomfortable leadership position by virtue of who her grandmother was. Dorothy's going to ask herself, how do you make a moral decision when every choice you make can wind up with someone dead? And is there a way to kind of break through that cycle of violence and vengeance? So, as we say in our preview, Dorothy's realized the skill set for waging war and building a lasting peace, sometimes they're not on the same page. Sometimes they're in completely different books. And so she's going to have to really grapple with that over the course of our series.
That's really cool. It's a great launch pad. I mean, like I say, I think you hit that with Spencer and Locke. You have that initial kind of, okay, let's grab your attention, but then you just spin off into all sorts of corners and really kind of. It's one thing I think that defines yourself as a writer in comics, in that you do get your sticky fingers into all sorts of different corners of the story. You really do explore, and you don't just kind of you don't let the story dictate. You do take charge of it, and that's fair enough. Aaron Neighbours is watching. Hello there, Aaron. Love the colours. The colours are really impressive. If we bring them up again,
Whitney Kogar she's the real wizard here. We talked a lot about what's the Mad Max version of Star Wars look like, because you've got that grittiness and that intensity of Mad Max, but Star Wars, so much of what defines the wonder of that is all the different settings and how each of them have their own unique palette and tone and temperature and internal high concept. And so Whitney has really just gone above and beyond, taking Rubens' already superlative inks and just kind of raising them to the next level. Just like the difference between, I don't know, Hoth and Dagobah and Tatooine and Cloud City. You're going to see the difference between the bombed out Emerald City versus the Deadly Desert versus the mountaintops of Ix versus the Wicked Witch's Castle. And I think that kind of establishes that sort of globe-trotting sense a little bit with the OZ. It allows Dorothy's journey to not just be about herself. It reminds us that with all these different obstacles she has to face in all these different locations, she's not just fighting for herself. She's fighting for the fate of an entire world. Yeah. And I think that really kind of raises the stakes and scale appropriately.
Well, I mean, you've got a comment here from Toby that's watching. Has Emerald City suffered a similar fate?
Yeah, things are not great in the Emerald City. As you can see just from that initial that third page, that's kind of sort of the epicenter of a war zone, and it's not good. But Dorothy may find some friends in that Emerald City still. So seeing sort of her journey through Oz is really going to influence, sort of the friends she meets and the makeshift army of four that she winds up bringing together.
Sure. We've got a comment or a question here from Solicitor Smeg, and I'm going to spin off onto this one, which is Solicitor Smeg's question. When creating the story, did you have to make sure copyright wouldn't be a problem, or since you've changed up the story quite a bit, was a non-issue?
Ah, crap!
Copyright, because isn't it out of copyright at this point?
So the way that the Wizard of Oz works, and I am glad that I want to give a shout out to my friend Jeff Gerber, because he kind of steered me away from something that was potentially problematic for me. But so the way that it works is the Wizard of Oz as a property, the novels are considered public domain. The Judy Garland film, however, is not. And so there are certain liberties that the Judy Garland film took. Things like really the ruby slippers are kind of the major liberty that they took. That they're silver in the books, so we have to use silver. So anybody looking for a no prize, it's that I didn't want to get sued. But yeah, the actual Wizard of Oz novels, they're all considered in the public domain. And while they're certainly a little darker at times than the Judy Garland film, for the most part, the plot points kind of line up. So, and the characters, of course, line up. So, it was just kind of steering clear of things like the ruby slippers, which were an invention for Technicolor.
Fair enough. And when it comes to those books,
yeah,
Frank L. Baum, I mean, there's a whole range of them. How much reading did you get into?
Yeah, well, I'm fortunate that I actually read a bunch of the L. Frank Baum books in college. I wrote a term paper on Oz in college. Basically I had said that the Land of Oz was kind of like a prototypical superhero universe, and that was kind of like, he, Baum was building continuity and mythology over 20 novels, decades before Stan and Jack ever came on the scene. And so, so I had some knowledge of Oz and its greater mythology. For me, the way that I really needed to thread the needle, my watchword's always accessibility. I don't want people to have read the Baum books to understand my book. Most people have this universal idea of the Wizard of Oz just from the Judy Garland film. So kind of hewing closer to that core quartet. But at the same time, we're able to then take some of the locales from Oz and kind of pepper them in, from the expanded universe, so to speak. So, for example, the Deadly Desert is one that I always kind of bring up. Is that's not something that was ever explored in the Judy Garland film, but it's something that's from the greater Oz mythology. Yeah. Jack Pumpkinhead is another character who I love. I've always loved that design. Ever since I saw Return to Oz the first time, and so. He plays a role in the book. It gets bigger in our second and third issues. But by the time you get there, you'll kind of understand why. And so, it's sort of been like, how can we have this be as accessible to the widest possible audience while still adding in, our Easter eggs to make sure that people, who are a little bit more of diehard Wizard of Oz fans, that they see like, oh, we respect the fandom and we respect the mythology and we respect Baum's work.
Fair enough. You've got Toby with two comments here, which kind of jump in. Militant Muchkins.
Yep.
And a new take on the Lollipop Guild.
Yeah, we'll be hitting plenty of those core constituencies. I and some of that is a little bleak. I think we have a line about like Munchkin graveyards or something like that. Things have not been great, and when you're in war, often it's the sort of smallest and weakest and most defenseless that get hurt first. So I think we've, that said, the resistance certainly has its fair share of people from all across Oz, from every different species and constituency. So weep for the Munchkins. They've certainly seen better days.
Fair enough. We talked about it at the top, just at how well the actual campaign has gone.
Yeah.
The campaign itself is covering the first issue.
Yes.
And you say you've got the 6-issue arc planned. Where can you see the 6 issues going to? Will that be Kickstarter based as well, or does it have a home publisher?
I'm committed to. We started this on Kickstarter. I want to make sure people who have backed us on Kickstarter can enjoy the full series. So I am really committed to making sure that happens. And like I said, I've written the whole series. Series is written. I'm really happy with where it turned out. We really get to explore the original Dorothy's legacy and sort of how her granddaughter fits in it. And, this is just as much, the cause of Oz becomes our new Dorothy's fight just as much as anybody else's. But seeing how the war has affected the other core members of the team, the Tin Soldier, for example, who has already become a fan favorite. He's this guy who he's been destroyed and rebuilt with whatever metals around him so many times that he's turned into this kind of towering war machine. And at the same time, this is a guy who wanted a heart. And so what happens to that heart when he's watched his friends die in front of him all these years? Do you bury that heart or does it come back? The Scarecrow is another character that I find really interesting in this book. He's kind of the most complex and complicated figure. But he, he's the guy who wanted a brain. He wanted to be smart. And he has now realized that just because you're the smartest man in the room doesn't mean you necessarily have solved everything. Sometimes you don't have answers. Sometimes you're just the first one to see how bad things are. And so, at the same time as any self-described genius like Elon Musk, there's a degree of ego to it. And, so he keeps going back to that Rubik's Cube, even if none of it's getting any better. And how does that embitter you? How does that twist you? Or the lion, guy wanted bravery. How's that calculus change when you're not just fighting for yourself anymore, when you're the king of the animal kingdom? The lion and Dorothy they're really going to find a lot of common ground. Both of their stories are about legacy. And the Lion is going to sort of be grappling with, you have this image from this rose-colored past, these ideals that you are just out of reach, and then you've been torn through the war and the muck, and now you're in like the cold, dirty present. And can you ever live up to those ideals? Were they even as real as he made them out to be? And so seeing how the war has not just touched Dorothy, but touched everyone in her orbit, I think that's something that I've had a lot of fun with. I think, and it's something that's been a little different from any of the other books that I've had. It's elevated the supporting cast in a way that they each have their own themes, and they each bring something to the table. This feels less like an ensemble piece, like Going to the Chapel, where you had sort of those core 3 leads with a bunch of scattered characters. And this feels like a true team book. So if you like things like Claremont's X-Men, or Final Fantasy VII or Chrono Trigger, any video game players in the house, you're gonna love kind of the way that these characters wind up jamming together.
Fair enough. I mean, from what I can see from the design work as well, and what the way you're describing, I can imagine there's also room for a number of spin-offs as well, where you could really kind of go metric with a lot of the characters, and really start exploring a lot with what the behind the scenes of the whole thing.
We've got ideas.
I bet you do. I bet you do.
As somebody who for a while had kind of sworn off more spin-offs, not to say I didn't love Spencer and Locke 2, but as I'm writing Spencer and Locke 3, it sometimes feels like I'm kind of dancing on the head of a pin. And so I've said, if I had a choice between sequels and doing something new, at this point, I would always do something new. But that was a week ago. And seeing sort of the overwhelming response to the OZ, I always write my stories with an idea in my back pocket. Always. Just in case, you never know what catches on. And, it was a challenging series to write. But, if the demand's there and Ruben and I's bandwidth is there, because I would never do a sequel to the OZ without Ruben and Whitney. It just would not happen. If everybody's sort of game for it and we have the time and the bandwidth and the energy to do it, I've got ideas. That's really the theme of the OZ in a lot of ways, is just because the war has been won doesn't mean that there isn't another battle just around the corner.
Yeah. And also the aftermath of that, indeed. I think the big appeal for me as well when it comes to the actual campaign, is that it is really affordable. It's accessible, and you can really come at it really, really without. In 2020, when you really do have to pick and choose from the books that you're. I've had to my pull list has been stripped all the way back because funds just aren't there. Yeah. But what you've got here, you've got a $5 start on this particular tip, but it really is it's affordable across the board. $10 your digital deluxe, and $15, and you can just keep going and going. But the fact that you can start really a really small entry level is a slight contrast to say Scott's campaign, where his wasn't exactly cheap out the gate. This is something that you can just get into.
Exactly. That's always been my goal, is to sort of have tiers for every level of your budget, but also to provide a lot of bang for your buck. So if you get our first tier for $5, you get the first issue PDF of Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel. That's you already get 44 pages just for throwing in $5. If you go for $10, you then double that, because now you get the digital first issue of the OZ and you get my script. The next tier, you add Ruben's untouched inks and Whitney's raw colors to the mix, and we kind of snowball from there. Because yes, absolutely, my it's like I've said, it's all been about expanding the readership. It's about being accessible. And, I was really fortunate that I had people like Charlie Stickney and Ryland Grant, who just completed his Kickstarter for The Jump. And people like Pat Shan and Russell Mahelty. I was in contact with them regularly to say, okay, how did you do this? What was the price points that you set in place? And, make our book sort of give you the most bang for your buck. And on top of that, now they've got the digital comics extravaganza. Now you throw in $10, you're not just getting 88 pages from me. you're getting hundreds of pages from other creators who are all just, really incredible. So yeah, it's like when you look at it like that, then you're like, oh, $10 feels kind of like a bargain. I mean, it's one of those things that yeah, like, people are cutting down on their entertainment costs. At the same time, they're not going to the movies anymore. They're not going to restaurants anymore. Yeah. And so being able to say, hey, like, it's sort of like Amazon shopping. We've gotten so used to the point and click that you order something and then like it shows up, a week later, a few days later. You're like, what was that thing I ordered again? Oh yeah, that was like a gift from past me. And yeah, that's sort of the goals.
I've been backing a couple of campaigns from the beginning of the pandemic, and they're starting to roll in now. And I'd completely forgotten I backed them. So no, that's exactly where I am at the moment.
I'm the same way as a Kickstarter lurker. I've backed over 200 campaigns, and it's just been sort of my way of like paying it forward. As every stereotypical Jewish writer who's ever lived in New York, I've done stand up. I've done Upright Citizens Brigade, and there's that sort of unspoken code of you go to my show, I'll go to your show. And so I've always sort of said, okay, like if it's an independent voice who I'm vibing with what they're doing, I'll always throw in. Granted, I live in a 2-bedroom in LA. I don't have a lot of shelf space, so I'm always buying digital. But that said, that means like I'm always getting emails about Kickstarters. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot I backed that. All right, like that's cool. I mean, that's how I met Charlie Stickney. For the first time, was I had backed White Ash well before I met him here in LA. And so when we met, I not only did we just hit it off personally, but I had already read White Ash and I thought it was so special and so well done. And that was really, I think the pipeline for me kind of saying, okay, like maybe that stigma's not there anymore. Maybe Kickstarter really is the future.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's something that I haven't brought up with many creators. I mean, I've kind of touched on and I've asked why was Kickstarter the platform? But like you say, there are other platforms. And say some of them do have stigmas involved. I mean, I think Indiegogo is probably the biggest one at the moment, especially when it comes to comics. It has that stink. Thank you very much indeed to a bunch of people that don't deserve the time to be mentioned, so we won't. So we leave that alone. But no, I think Kickstarter has become certainly a home for creators. I think the difference between Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and I think there's that element. Indiegogo, if it doesn't reach its target, people will still get the money. Right. With Kickstarter, it's more of a case of you are putting yourself in the hands of the people who are backing you. It's very much, it's a definite relationship. It's not just a case of there's the money.
It's not a storefront.
Absolutely. When it comes to the actual release of the OZ, what's the timetable? I mean, we're looking at
a December fulfillment.
Because it's 21 days left on the campaign.
Yes.
So December when the book's getting out.
Yeah, that's our goal. Assuming everything's good with the post office, and we still have a post office, that should be fine. Like I've said,
that's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation. We're done with the book. The only things that we're working on left, a few pinups, like I said, because we've added pinups to the book. Ruben is working on our cameo appearances right now, since those all got bought in our first day. And I'm working on just like the back cover, and the inside, front, and back cover, just kind of figuring out how we're gonna do that. But the book is done. The story pages are all done, cover's done. So once the pinups and sort of the back page are all put together, we'll be sending it to the printer. We're working with Comic Impressions down in Florida. They've told me they've got a very quick turnaround, and they're in Florida, so they're not going to be shutting down from COVID anytime soon. And beyond that, it's very exciting. I mean, I think we've given ourselves a really generous cushion to make sure that we deliver things on time. Sort of my commitment is, God forbid that like the mail system is slowed down, because all of our tiers have some sort of digital component. We will be able to distribute that while people are waiting for their print product. But yeah, it's exciting. It's sort of when I started this campaign, people were saying, well, if you get more than 300 backers, you should consider using BackerKit. And now we're like approaching 800 backers. And so that's one of my phone calls today is with BackerKit, to figure out, is that the best way of helping out with the fulfillment of everything. I've already got a couple hundred Gemini mailers in my apartment. I clearly didn't order enough. Got to get more. Got the stamps.com account, got the scale. I've gamed out how this is all going to work. And yeah, it's very exciting. I think it's just getting all the add-ons together.
I was going to ask what the price of a campaign that is this popular is. I'm trying.
Are you asking in like a Thanos way? What did it cost me? Everything.
Well, yes, yes. So you are wandering around with a withered arm and just we're wondering what's going on.
Yeah.
But no, I think the sense of just the sheer amount now of fulfillment that you have to back up, because that can really swallow up a lot of time and heart and energy.
Thankfully, I work from home. Thankfully, my pressing deadlines are all hit. So it's really just once this comes in, I'm hunkering down. I've made it a point. For example, I felt a little bad about it. I was behind on our thank you notes for this book. So the last 2 nights I've been up till about 1 a.m, making sure that I've been thanking every single backer individually. Now we're caught up. That's kind of the approach that I'm going to take with the fulfillment as well. Is I don't like these things sitting in my apartment, so I'm going to make sure that like the fastest we can get them out, the better. My eternally patient and loving girlfriend has agreed to help me out with the fulfillment. We might even break our bubble and have my younger brother from down the street help me out. But yeah, it's just it's getting the system in place. Thankfully, the local community has also been very supportive. So I know my friends at Golden Apple and the Comic Bug will supply me in bags and boards for as long as I need them. And it's just it's manpower. It's just hunkering down and putting nose to grindstone. Thankfully, that's the kind of work I'm best at. And so, we've got the laser printer with the label maker. We're ready to start this operation.
And the sparing.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, as soon as the books as soon as the pinups are ready, as soon as the cameos are done, as soon as the back cover is finished, it's going straight to the printer. We're gonna at least get started on having stuff ready. And then beyond that, it's just sort of, waiting for the fulfillment, waiting to see what our final numbers are. And that feels like a kid on Christmas, or I guess in my case, Hanukkah growing up, is that you're like, you don't know what you're going to get, but these numbers are so incredible. And the fact that, it's really been a nice split. I want to say it's been a 2/3 split for print in favor of digital. But like digital is not hard for us. We hit a button and there it goes. But I think it speaks to our readership that they feel something with this book. They want to see it in their hands. They want to see all the variant covers. They even want to have some of our special reward tiers, whether it's doing a Skype session with me over a portfolio review, or how to run a Kickstarter, or how to navigate Hollywood or publicity. Ruben Rojas, I think, might have a couple of commissions left. We've even got a couple of extremely limited, ultra rare, handmade Spencer and Locke plushies that I had made for our creative team. We have 2 left in existence. It's a piece of history, so we have that up on the Kickstarter as well. But yeah, it's really heartening as a creator, and I honestly I couldn't be more grateful. And I promise anybody watching and all of our readers, this is some of the best work that any of us have ever done, and I don't think we're going to let you down with it.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah, I'm looking forward to getting my copy. Very much. It looks exciting. It looks dynamic, and like you say, it's working on all sorts of. It's.
Are we going to see?
Levels.
I'm seeing a question. Are we going to see any of our favorite characters dismembered?
How much? The question is, how much gore is in the book? I mean, obviously, it isn't geared towards kids, but am I going to see any favorite characters dismembered or anything like that?
No, I mean, granted, I haven't seen how the rest of the book looks. Like I said, we're working on issue I wrote it as issue 3, but it's the second installment. We're working on that now. But no, there's no gore. Tonally, I say this is somewhere between Mad Max Fury Road and Star Wars Rogue One. So yeah, I mean, that's not really my bag. And thankfully, like most of our characters aren't human, so there's not going to be a whole lot of that in there. But yes, I promise you, we're going out of our way to make sure that we're not being like grotesque for this book. So yes, definitely not for kids, but it's a PG-13 rating. And yes, you're not going to see dismembered limbs or anything. At least not as far as has been drawn. And I don't see, Ruben doesn't strike me as the type.
Fair enough. We'll wrap things up in a second, but we'll just finish with this one. If I've said it once, I've said it a million times. Digital will never take over floppies. At the end of the day, comics are collectibles, and you can't collect PDFs.
It's very true.
Correct.
That's very true.
Absolutely.
Just try as I might. So yes, I please, thank you. I was going to say, you can order all 4 of our covers. We actually have a special discount on them. So if you buy all 4 covers, it's basically you're getting 4 for the price of 3. So yes, if you're a collector, we got tons of covers for you. Cool. And we are exploring, like I said, enhanced cover options. We're talking with our printer right now about it. So yeah, stay tuned. We'll have some cool stuff to share soon.
Cool. Let's put that address back up on the screen then for people to go and check it out. Kickstarter.com/projects, the OZ comic /the-OZ-1. David, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much
for having me. I appreciate it. It means the world.
I mean, congratulations.
Thank you.
Not necessary at this point because it's done
I'll
incredibly well. But further and onward and upward, and here's to breaking more of the stretch goals and continued success with the book. Looking forward to seeing first issue. Looking forward to seeing the run because I suspect this is going to be a story which isn't just going to be a one and done. I think it's going to be.
I can't wait to show you guys.
There's more to this, I feel. So it's looking good. David, once again, thank you very much indeed for coming on.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Definitely. It's. Thank you.
Yeah. Stay safe. Look after yourself, and I'll see you down the line, man.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Take care. So there you go. I'm going to bring the artwork up on the screen again one more time, just so you can just check this out. It really is something special. The OZ, which is David's book. The comments came in. It looks amazing. The concepts look strong, but the artwork is definitely a standout as well. Very much looking forward to seeing what this does. And in the landscape of Kickstarter books out there at the moment, it's one that definitely stands out and holds your attention. So onwards and upwards for the OZ from David Pepose and the rest of the team. That's been our incidental episode. Thank you very much indeed for watching today. We are going to be back tomorrow with another special episode. Hopefully you can join us for something, if not a little serious, but certainly something that you could be worthwhile checking in if you are somebody that's been paying attention to the way that the industry has been adapting to revelations of misdeeds and misbehavior. The Comic Book Legal Defense Fund is a organization which has done some great work over the decades, but has had that work mired. The downside to the revelations are not necessarily the fact that they have come out over the last couple of weeks, or indeed last month or so, but the fact that these are revelations that have spanned decades. It's now a case of how the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund can move forward. That's what we're going to be talking to Jeff Trexler, who is the interim director of the organization. That's tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. GMT. Do join us for that. Sunday is going to be James Tynion the 4th, which means if you are a fan of Batman, if you're a fan of some really impressive comic writing, if you've read Something is Killing the Children, I have read the first issue of Department of Truth, which he's done with Martin Simmons, which is chef's kiss. It's gorgeous. That's one of the most intriguing comics I've seen upcoming and I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to do with the rest of that series. Cullen Bunn on the 6th of September, 13th September, Julie Tate from the Lakes Festival, 20th September, the creative team behind That Texas Blood, Chris Condon and Jacob Phillips. And I can say that the Sunday after the 27th, we are going to be talking to Elsa Chatelier, who is an incredible artist. Looking forward to talking to her. That is our lineup. Hopefully you can join us for those shows. Do join us tomorrow, because it's going to be a bit of an interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to diving into what the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, the next chapter for that organisation. For myself, from me to you, stay safe, look after yourself, and hopefully you can join us for another Talking Con, a cup of tea with Englishman in San Diego down the line. From me to you, take care.